Welcome, dear listeners, to our episode of EdTalks, the podcast where we explore the latest trends and innovations that are shaping the future of education and L&D. I'm your host, Inna, a learning strategist at Eli.io, and today joining our conversation is Anna, a senior instructional designer at Amazon, with a background in neuroscience and extensive experience in both startup and corporate environments. She's passionate about empowering organizations through measurable, that's my favorite word, of this year in terms of L&D, so measurable evidence-based learning. And today we'll focus on exploring evidence-based design, AI applications in L&D, of course we can't pass up the chance, and effective communication of technology choices to stakeholders. Hi Anna, it's wonderful to see you today.
Hi, Inna. Thank you for having me today, and thanks to all our listeners. It's wonderful to see you too.
Yeah, so we've got really interesting topics to discuss. However, each and every session of ours, we start from rapid fire questions. So it's the same set of 5 questions that we ask from each and every speaker of ours. And by the end of the season, we summarize the results. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Cool. So first things first, what book or a resource maybe can you recommend on L&D or educational topic?
I love How to Make It Stick. It's a book about how memory works and learning works. And I think that's like, if you're reading just one book about the learning science, it should be How to Make It Stick.
That's a great recommendation coming from you. So who do you recommend to follow and invite to this podcast from L&D experts?
I'm not sure if you've already invited him, but there is Zsolt Ola. He's a learning technologist and I think head of data and HR at Intel right now. He used to work at Amazon and we worked together and he was my mentor. He is absolutely great on everything that's about L&D, data, science, measurable results, impact. He's brilliant.
Yeah, I do follow him on LinkedIn, and every post of his just gives the valuable information that you need at the right time, right? So yeah, okay, next question. Can you share a memorable failure or a setback in your L&D journey, and how did you overcome it?
A failure or setback?
Yeah.
I would say the start of the L&D journey, it wasn't really a failure or setback, but it was challenging because I was in Ukraine at that moment and L&D was not the most widespread career that you would go for. So I didn't even know that my job was called instructional design. I think we called it something else. So I had to learn a lot about instructional design myself. And because I didn't know how it's called, it was really challenging to find any helpful resources. And at some point, I stumbled across instructional design as a job, and I realized, oh, that's what I do. And that really helped me speed up in my upskilling and learn the basics of the job. But if you don't know how the job is called, then that's kind of challenging to learn.
Yeah, it's funny you say so, but I really can totally relate because my journey also started in Ukraine, and I also transitioned from another area. And you started up as a neuroscience, if I'm right. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. I was a neuroscientist in Germany, and I worked on online courses, but I didn't know that people who create online courses, or not only online courses, are called instructional designers.
Yeah, I feel that train the trainer topic could be this separate conversation and a whole set of episodes of podcasts, because this is something which is really quite important, and for many specialists across the world, not just in Ukraine or in Europe, that's everywhere, I suppose. That's just hard to come by that, you got a proper education.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What question must be asked on a job interview for L&D specialists or instructional designers? The choice is yours.
Oh, this is such a great question. I think we should ask every specialist, how do you measure impact of the learning that you create? And not only on a job interview, really, I think we should ask ourselves this question in our day-to-day job. Like when I'm creating something or designing something or planning something, how am I going to measure impact even before I've created it?
Yeah. I feel that this question is for the last couple of years is one of the biggest in L&D in general, because we got stuck in the routine And, I've noticed a couple of years ago, I used to be an instructional designer, I mentioned to you. And one of the reasons that I actually decided to transition a little bit is that I found myself in the loop where I get a request that, hey, we need an instructional material. I would go to a tool that our company had, and I would just click on plus, then I would have some tabs, copy paste the information. And that's not because I didn't want to create a proper learning material, but it's because the overload was so huge, and organization and I stopped asking ourselves, just like you mentioned, how do I measure what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And you depend on your stakeholders. And if the stakeholders expect you to just go and create a clickable experience, then it's very difficult to go back to them and say no, and let's look at the data. Stakeholders can be different, but I guess we'll talk about this later.
You're absolutely right. This is one of the parts that I'm mostly excited about, the stakeholder management. And finally, last question of our not so rapid fire questions, but I feel that I could talk with you forever on each question in details. So if you had to give just one piece of advice for someone just starting their career in L&D, what would that be?
Just one piece of advice. That's difficult. L&D is such a versatile career, but probably to learn as much as you can, like learn all the time. Just keep learning, even when you feel like you know instructional design and you know L&D and it's all clear. Still keep going, because learning, especially from the scientific point of view, like there's so much still to discover and explore, and new evidence pops up every now and then, and new research from companies, but also from academic institutions. And there is always something new to learn and to use. So my advice would be just keep learning, stay
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, we've had 2 weeks ago a podcast episode with Ross Stevenson. He had very similar advice, actually. How do you practice what you preach? Because as learning specialist, you are supposed to learn yourself constantly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so coming to the main part of our conversation, let's dive into the evidence-based design. If you could, just for someone who might have not faced the term that often, just in a nutshell, in one sentence, how would you describe evidence-based design?
Evidence-based design is design which is guided by scientific evidence. That's why it's evidence-based. And I mean, not even scientific evidence. Evidence can come from science. So you might go and read some research on the topic of learning sciences or educational psychology or even neuroscience. Or evidence can come from your own experience. So you might have collected some data in the past, analyzed it, and use it as an evidence to inform your design and to create an experience based on this evidence. So this would be evidence-based design in a nutshell. Design informed by evidence, be it scientific evidence or your own evidence backed by data.
Okay. So coming back to me a couple of years ago, stuck in the loop that, I just create clickable experience, and that's not something that you'd ideally want, but that's something which is expected from you by many organizations, right? How can I implement evidence-based design to daily projects that I have to do?
Yeah, that's a challenging question, because there is no point where you've implemented it and you are done. Evidence-based design is implemented. It's definitely a process, and in this process there will be trade-offs. So at some point you will be doing both clickable experiences, but also informed by evidence, and you will slowly transition into evidence-based design. But I would suggest to get started actually with learning a little bit more about learning sciences and generally how the brain works, and learning the key strategies in evidence-based design and how you can apply them. So for example, we know that for adults, one of the key strategies is to provide practice and to let adults practice. So when you're designing, let's say, an online course, maybe on conflict management, it may not make sense to provide a lot of information on the history of conflict management or something like that, but it would make sense to provide a lot of exercises where the learners can practice conflict management techniques and then also receive feedback. And that's something that is backed also by evidence from science, and I assume from data from different organizations, even if this data is not publicly available, that we need practice in order to learn better, and we need feedback in order to learn better. And we also need learning objectives because they keep us focused on the content. So there is no one way to practice evidence-based design, but to keep yourself updated, to read How to Make It Stick, by the way, because it is a very evidence-based design book, designed for how people learn, from Julie Dirksen, also the classics. She provides a lot of evidence, like loads of studies, but she has condensed them in a very nice way that is readable and understandable. Maybe follow Philippa Hardman on LinkedIn as well. She is actually a professor, if I'm not mistaken, at Cambridge. So she has a very academic background in learning sciences, but the way she condenses and translates all the research from learning sciences into practice is just brilliant. And she provides a lot of recommendations around using evidence-based approaches that might seem very far away because they're in academia, but she provides really good recommendations how to use them in an actual practical environment.
I think that most of the instructional designers are familiar with the statistics, very sad statistics, that 90% of instructional material gets forgotten by the end of the second week, and 80% of the training is ineffective. So sometimes it feels that there are more questions than answers in creating learning content, right? So how does evidence-based design reply to these pains in terms of retention, engagement, etc.? Could you give a bit more examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think retention is closely connected to how the memory works. So with retention, there are, of course, a few strategies to improve retention in the learning design, such as repetition, reinforcement, so coming back to certain topics throughout the learning experience and letting learners, again, experience these topics, practice in these topics, and provide in different contexts. So if we're speaking about the course on conflict management, you could provide learners with a couple of scenarios, and these scenarios are spread out through the learning experience, and these scenarios train the same thing, but maybe in a slightly different context. So the scenarios would be slightly different, even though the learners would be learning the same technique. So that would enhance retention. And I think another thing about memory that often gets forgotten is that memory is time dependent. So you might finish a course and remember everything now and be ready to apply it on the job, but then you don't need it right now. And when the time comes, let's say in a month from now, you've already forgotten the course.
Yeah.
So the learning should be delivered just in time when you need it, not just in case you need it sometime in the future. But also there is a certain degree of repetition required. And ideally, if you've taken a course now, it would be good to have a refresher some point in the future, maybe in 2 weeks, maybe in a month, maybe when you actually need it, it would be good to have a refresher. And that could be another evidence-based strategy, this repetition which is spread out in time. As for engagement, that's a whole different topic because learning can be engaging but not efficient. So if we're talking about clickable experiences, that's quite engaging because I behaviorally engage with a clickable experience because I have to click through. I'm just not engaging with it intellectually. Right, and we want learners to be actually engaged intellectually. So that's a slightly different, not a slightly, it's quite a different thing. And to engage the learners intellectually, we should provide them with problems that they should solve. Regardless of the topic, I think in any topic, we have certain problems or certain issues that learners will encounter in real life, and we want them to be prepared. But if we don't provide them with enough practice during learning, if we don't let them solve these problems, if we don't provide them with feedback, then they will never engage intellectually and they will not be prepared to actually solve the issue when they encounter it on the job. So that's also something to keep in mind: behavioral engagement, intellectual engagement, and engagement is not the goal. Like, we are not aiming in L&D for engagement, right? We're aiming for business impact. So I feel like sometimes we over-index on engagement instead of actually paying attention to the behavior change and the performance results. And then, of course, providing an experience which is engaging, but which brings these results, not necessarily a great engagement because the experience is extremely fun and gamified, but at the end, you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like I think LinkedIn conducted this yearly report, and there the topic of metrics, of course, was one of the most important ones. And I'm not sure. So there they conducted the research where the results show that most of the metrics that L&D uses are, for instance, NPS. So mainly, the vanity metrics. And what exactly do they give us? That, yeah, it was engaging. Yeah, it was entertaining. This horrible term, edutainment, right? So, well,
Yeah.
anyway, coming back to the metrics, and measurable results, and I know you've got a lot of experience in that. So how do you see the measurableness? Is that a word? Measurableness? Let's call it like that. In terms of the evidence-based design. So how are these intersectional topics?
Yes, of course. I would say so the evidence is always based on the measurement. So if the learning experience that someone is creating does not provide measurable results, then we cannot get any evidence out of that experience and then use this evidence to inform our decisions. And I mean, in terms of measurableness, there are different frameworks. I think Kirkpatrick Phillips is still very much applicable to our experience nowadays and to our work. There are also other frameworks depending on a specific use case. But I think Kirkpatrick Phillips is a good place to start. Well, we have this L1 NPS, whether you like learning or not, measurement, but then we go to L2, which is assessments, and then L3, which is behavior, and L4, which is business results, that is either profit or savings.
Yeah.
And I understand why in L&D we often focus on L1 only, because that's within our control. We can't control whether learning is engaging, whether it's fun, whether we get good feedback from the learners, even if this feedback is not an indicator of a better performance. But when it comes to performance, we as L&D have to collaborate with the other parts of the business much more. We have to collaborate with the rest of the HR. We have to collaborate with the operations, with managers, and so on. And that's a much more complex and challenging task than focusing on engagement only. But I strongly believe that we should do this. Like, we should focus on trying to collaborate with everyone and pull everyone into the room and sit down and think, how can we together measure performance in a way that would then inform how we design learning? And then again, how do we design learning in a way that improves performance, which we measure and then inform to design learning? Having this kind of loop, even though it would take more effort than just focusing on the feedback results.
Yeah. I feel that it also depends on the organization. So, for instance, there are some, I think there are not even some, there are many organizations that still do think of L&D as an additional extra feature, which you can sell as for instance, hey, we've got some options for education and it's really fun and it's really nice in our company. So it's just a way to attract employees and keep the retention as well. That's why we have mainly focused on NPS in these scenarios. But in terms of evidence-based design, you mentioned to me once that you might have already implemented it without realizing it. Can you share the examples? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, if you design a course and you have an assessment in that course, and in the assessment you have a scenario, and you ask the learners to select the best solution to this scenario, or even to maybe type in this solution, that would already be an implementation of evidence-based design, because from evidence we know that we need, yes, some theory, but we also need practice and we need feedback. And it's often done in this order, like first theory, then practice, feedback, and it works well. There can be different orders, like you can also shift the order and it would still work, or it might work differently for different topics. But if you have assessments in your courses that you design, that's already an implementation of evidence-based design. There's always space for improvement when it comes to assessment or any instructional design, really. But that would be one of the examples. Or if you've designed a video, let's say, and in the video, you highlight the key topics, or you highlight the key parts of the video that you want learners to pay attention to, maybe providing some cues. That would also be an evidence-based design, because there is a multimedia learning theory which provides us with a number actually of rules how to design multimedia content so that it attracts and keeps learners' attention.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds great. And I feel that it's a great way to start your journey from as well, because we all do share the idea that you can't just create some video which is fun and interactive and interesting to watch, but what's the key outcome? And I feel that each and every instructional designer will relate with this idea. So yeah, you might be already implementing evidence-based design without realizing it. But in terms of the issues that we've discussed, right, in terms of stakeholders, in terms of, hey, I've got 10 courses per month that I must do, but I don't have time on working on properly on learning objectives, on doing the full research needs analysis, etc. So how do we communicate and, just secure the understanding of stakeholders um, that you can do more and this will bring better results? So do you have experience on that and your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually stakeholder management is the most challenging task in our jobs as instructional designers. We can be brilliant designers. So we might know learning science, we might know graphic design and motion design and everything. Instructional design is quite a wide range of skills, but stakeholder management is what defines what we actually do in our jobs. So if we fail in stakeholder management, or if, yeah, it's just complex, then we might not be able to use our skills to the best benefit of the business. So I don't have like an answer which would give you results overnight. I mean, honestly, I'm still figuring it out myself, and probably I will be figuring it out for the rest of my career, same as all of us. But I think stakeholder management is definitely not something that you can do overnight. There are no magic words or a magic sentence that you can say to your stakeholders, and then they will be all aligned and they will believe in evidence-based design and they will just go along with you. But it's a conversation, and having this conversation with your stakeholders, informing them that, look, learning can have better ROI. Let's talk ROI. L&D is not a benefit, it's a business function. We can bring so much more benefit. We can bring a better return on your investment. Every stakeholder is interested in return on their own investment, right? So that's a way to start a conversation and think through the ROI and think how will we measure these results for the benefit of the stakeholder. And then, of course, stakeholders have their own expectations. And sometimes the expectation is we have a budget for 10 courses, so you should produce these 10 courses. And then the goal is achieved. And while there's not much we can do in this situation as instructional designers, because we will have to do that, but we can always have a conversation around how we design these courses, what results are we trying to achieve with these courses, what strategies are we trying to use, and what are the consequences of using certain strategies. So if the stakeholders want 10 courses, or they want, I don't know, an hour-long video, that happens sometimes that someone wants an hour-long video. We as instructional designers can always have this informational conversation saying that there would be consequences of having an hour-long video, and we know that from the data that learners cannot sustain attention for 1 hour, so we should probably go for a 3-minute video instead of 1 hour. And maybe we should not even go for a video. Maybe there are other ways to achieve these results, and basically present stakeholders with consequences and alternative options. So what we can do as instructional designers, because stakeholders may not be aware of what's possible, and they should not be aware of what's possible. It's our job as L&D professionals to inform and educate our stakeholders about how learning works, how it can work as a business function, and how it can work for the learners. So it's our job to explain to them all these strategies in a meaningful way, of course, without extra detail, and to provide them with options of what can be done, and to provide them with the data, what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, totally relate with your understanding of that, and the communication aspect is one of the most challenging and interesting at the same time, because unless you can illustrate the example, then you can't really expect the understanding on the other side. But also, please do be prepared that it might not turn out the way you'd like that to, for several reasons, right? We might not understand some business aspects, but of course, I do still also see in the organizations that edutainment attitude, right? That we have education for fun, just like an extra feature, right? So that's something to work with, right? working.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a very good point that stakeholder management is not, yeah, like even if you're brilliant at stakeholder management, you still may not be successful because stakeholders can be different. And some stakeholders will never agree with what you are suggesting and they will never be on board. And maybe they actually have some information or a perspective that we as L&D professionals are missing. So in a conversation with the stakeholders, I always try to think, okay, from their perspective, what is important and what are they trying to achieve? Because for me, it might be something else, and I might be looking at this engagement and performance results, but for the stakeholders, they might have a different perspective on it, actually a business perspective that I'm missing. So trying to understand this and having this conversation and asking questions is very important.
Yeah. So coming to the other topic of our conversation that we have planned, I already see that we are running out of time, but that only means that the conversation is really interesting. I hope it's interesting for you as well, our listeners. But AI, of course, it's impossible not to talk about AI these days. I feel that it's everywhere and it's here for a while. So in terms of statistics, Gartner predicts that by 2026, over 80% of enterprises will use GenAI APIs or integrate GenAIs in their applications. My take on that I'm a bit more skeptical. I feel that there are so many factors to include, organizations, country-wise, specialist-wise as well. I'm not sure if everyone will be ready to adopt by 2026, which is just 2 years. And so from your experience, Gen AI in large organizations right now in 2024, how does it look like?
Well, I'm a big proponent of Gen AI because I think it can provide us with massive productivity gains. And by that, I mean that we will free up our time also as L&D professionals for things that are exciting and meaningful, such as collaborating more or communicating more and building communities. But speaking of large organizations, I do think that, yeah, of course, there's some things that we need to improve in Gen AI before we can scale it. And if you have used ChatGPT or Claude or Google Bard or any other tool, you know that they hallucinate, which means that they make mistakes. They can provide us with information which is not accurate. And for large organizations, that's a big issue. One thing is if I use this, for my own, I don't know, to write a LinkedIn post, that's all right. But as a large organizations also have large responsibilities. So they cannot rely on a tool which does not produce accurate information or accurate results. So I see that as a big obstacle to scaling Gen AI for now. And of course, there are a lot of people in the world who are currently working on this obstacle. So it won't be there for a very long time. But right now, of course, Gen AI has certain limitations. Accuracy is one of them. Another one are ethical limitations. What happens with the data? How is it stored? Is then the model trained on this data? So basically, what's the privacy around there? So that's also a limitation for any large organization. It shouldn't be something that really prevents us from thinking how we can innovate with Gen AI. So I think as L&D professionals, especially, we should really think how we can use Gen AI to innovate in our work and for our learners, but keep in mind these limitations and how we are going to mitigate for them.
Yes, totally relate with your statement. Well, I do like the idea of starting from the basics and what is the most mundane and boring task that takes your time. For instance, I don't know, calendar invitations, right? If that can be automized, go ahead, dive deeper, explore the topic. However, I wouldn't trust many things that are expected to be trusted, let's say so. In terms of content creation as well, that I haven't seen the organizations that fully trust AI content creation part, but it is tempting. And here comes the discussion of human versus AI, right? So I think that we can all agree that it's neither nor, that it's always in the middle and there always be human controlling the processes. But if you can mitigate the mundane tasks that can be automized, then why not, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. It will always be a collaboration with AI in a way, so we can use AI to create even now we can use AI to create content or to perform other tasks, but we should keep human in the loop to review the results and make sure that they are accurate and that they're not biased and that they
Mhm.
can be used for sure. So it's not like we're removing human from.
Yes, fully agree. In terms of content creation, it's really easy to follow the hype and choose as many tools as it's possible. What's your take on that? So, how do you understand what truly is necessary for your organization? So, how do you, maybe you've had an experience of needs analysis or conducting any research, or so what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, first of all, with content, like the content use case is something that I think about a lot because we already create a lot of content, to be honest. Like we don't need tools that will help us create even more content, more than we create now, because there's enough content in the world created. So maybe before even starting to audit existing tools or any potential new tools, we should go back and think, okay, now we can produce as much content as we want. We actually don't have budget or headcount limitations because we have AI and we can buy an AI tool and produce loads of content within just a few hours. So how do we make sure that we measure impact, that we have planned for measuring impact, that we actually need this content to produce the impact? And if we actually need the content to produce the impact, then we should go and pick the tools that we need, whether that's video creation or audio creation or writing and so on. And when it comes to these tools that actually create content for you, I think all the big tools in the industry, like even I don't know if you use Articulate Storyline, for example, to create learning experiences, they are now planning, they have AI features on their roadmap. So at some point we will not have to go and look for new tools because our existing tools will incorporate the AI features. And the question is for the new tools, is this a new startup or is this a reliable company that we can trust with our data, with our corporate data? Can we use the tool that they are providing, or can we maybe wait until the tools that we're using will just upgrade to this level, providing the GenAI functionality that we need?
Yeah, yeah. My perspective is that I know there are some websites where you just type in the topic and it generates the course for you with text and assessments and everything. I'm not sure. I think that you will agree with me that there is not much evidence-based approach there because well, that's a bit too much to put on AI, and this is so limited in terms of corresponding to needs of your organization. However, I think that most of the larger organizations now have the also the thought that we create too much content. My perspective and my experience is that there are many organizations who still use PDF with 150 pages, and they give them to you during the onboarding process, right? And this is something, like you mentioned, that you might use half a year later, but you won't remember the material half a year later. So I do believe that in terms of updating the content and tailoring it based on 2024, right? Where you can use not just Word document or maybe test if you're lucky. So in these aspects, AI content creation tools can really benefit for these kind of organizations.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that AI can even help audit this kind of
Yeah.
experiences. Like if you have a 150-page PDF, tools like even ChatGPT now, paid version, or Claude, they have a really large context
Mhm.
window, which means that they can process large documents. You can drop this document, make sure there is no confidential data in there, of course. So
Important
no
note.
confidential data, public information, drop the document to the ChatGPT and ask it what might be relevant here. So you can collaborate with ChatGPT to kind of inform your decisions, but the decision at the end is human decision.
Yes, yes, fully relate with that. So, well, last but not the least from my questions, coming back again to stakeholder communication, but now in terms of AI. So, how do you manage effectively this aspect? How do you prove that? Because some of the tools, for instance, if we want to suggest switching from LMS to LXP, this is a pricey change. So, how do you effectively communicate this aspect?
That's a tricky question because it really depends on your stakeholders' familiarity with the topic of AI. You might have very passionate stakeholders who will bring the topic to the table themselves and ask you to use AI or to incorporate AI into learning, or you might have stakeholders who actually don't believe in AI and don't like this whole hype around AI and so on. So it would really depend on the stakeholders. But I would say that as L&D professionals, we should upskill ourselves because that's the future. It's impossible. Like, we will have to use AI whether we want it or not, and it's better be us who brings this conversation to our stakeholders and highlights what can be done with AI, what cannot be done with AI at the moment, and what would be the best use case for us also in terms of ROI. To avoid a situation where the expectations are mismanaged and the stakeholders expect that the AI is magic and it will create 10 courses for them in an hour, but these courses are going to be very suboptimal quality.
Yes, yes. And with this, it's time to sum up our episode. Thank you for tuning into EdTalks. Today, we tackled the topics of evidence-based design, AI, and stakeholder management. Thanks again to Anna for your insights. Stay tuned for more, and until the next time.